There is a piece of advice you have heard in every strategy meeting you have ever sat in. Strong opinions, loosely held. It sounds like humility with a spine, and it points at one of the genuinely useful ideas in forecasting. But almost everyone repeating it has the words wrong, has the origin half wrong, and cites a piece of neuroscience that does not say what they think it says. So let's fix all three, and then let's talk about why the fixed version is much harder to live with than the slogan. Here is the shape of the next 10 minutes. First, the phrase itself, which has been quietly misquoted for about 40 years, and the misquote matters more than you would expect, than where it actually came from, which was not a boardroom. It was the problem of predicting the future for a living. Then the older roots, because this idea is roughly 2,000 years older than Silicon Valley. Then the part everybody gets wrong about why we fail at it. And finally, 3 rules that make it survivable in a real room with real colleagues. In its native habitat, the phrase is a permission slip. Someone states a position with total confidence, resists every challenge to it for the length of the meeting, and then, when the thing collapses 2 quarters later, reaches for the second half of the phrase as an apology. Well, I held it loosely, and notice what has happened there. The looseness was never practiced. It was claimed afterwards as a way of not owning the cost. That is not a thinking tool. That is an exit clause. The original idea has a very specific structure, and that structure is what got lost. So let's go get it. Forecaster Paul Saffo has been saying strong opinions weakly held since the mid-1980s. Not loosely, weakly. I know how that sounds, correcting one adverb, but the 2 words describe completely different behaviors. Loosely held is about your grip. It means you were never fully committed, which conveniently means you can never be fully wrong. Weakly held is about the claim's structure. A weak claim, in this sense, is one that is easy to knock over on purpose because you built it that way. You have already worked out what would break it. Loosely held protects you. Weakly held exposes you. Everyone kept the word that protects them. To see why the structure matters, you have to look at the job it was invented for. Not managing people, predicting things professionally and being graded on it. Saffo was a technology forecaster, a Stanford lecturer, and for years ran the Institute for the Future. His whole trade was telling people what was coming while the evidence was still thin, and he noticed the standard failure. Faced with real uncertainty, capable people freeze. They wait for more data. They schedule another review. The waiting feels like rigor, and it is actually just deferral. So the fix is deliberately backwards. Do not withhold judgment until the search is complete. Force a tentative forecast out of whatever you have right now, however lousy. Then, and this is the entire discipline, systematically tear it apart. The opinion is scaffolding. You build it so you have something to climb on while you find out it was in the wrong place. Saffo's own line is that the fastest route to a good forecast usually runs through a sequence of lousy ones. That sounds like a joke about consultants, and it is not. A vague position generates nothing. There is no observation that could contradict it, so the world tells you nothing back, and you can hold it indefinitely at no cost. A sharp, specific, probably wrong position immediately tells you what to go and look at. It converts your uncertainty into a question with an answer. That is the actual product of the strong opinion, not correctness, direction, and a way of finding out, which means the strong half exists to serve the weak half. And if you only ever do the strong half, you have kept the packaging and thrown away the machine. None of this was invented in California. The move underneath it is one of the oldest arguments in philosophy, but how anybody knows anything at all. Start with Socrates, whose entire reputation rests on insisting he knew nothing. The Socratic method is not a debating trick for winning rooms, although it has been used that way for about as long as it has existed. It is a demolition procedure. You take a belief that feels obvious, and you follow it until it contradicts something else the person also believes. Socrates was not building monuments of certainty. He was checking whether the foundations held, in public, repeatedly on beliefs that other people were extremely attached to, which is roughly why it ended the way it did for him. Intellectual humility has never been a low-risk position. The closer ancestor is Pyrrhonism. The Pyrrhonists practiced something called Epoché, the suspension of judgment. Their argument was that our senses and our evidence are always partial, so locking dogmatically onto a final verdict is simply not warranted. You act on how things appear to you while declining to claim you know how they truly are. Now, I want to be straight about this because you will see this comparison made carelessly. The Pyrrhonists were not proto-scientists. They were not stress testing hypotheses. Their goal was at a rac cia, freedom from mental disturbance. Suspending judgment was how you stopped being tormented by questions you could not settle. So they supply the humility half of our phrase, genuinely and deeply. They do not supply the testing half. For that you have to jump about 2,000 years. Karl Popper supplies the missing half. His argument is that no pile of confirming evidence ever establishes a theory because the next observation can still overturn it, but a single clean contradiction can destroy one outright. So the confirming evidence was never the interesting part. The question that actually does work is, what would I have to see for this to be false? And a sting in that is the bit people skip. If you cannot answer it, if there is no observation that would count against your position is not strong. It is empty. It is unfalsifiable, which feels like invincibility and is actually the absence of any content at all. Sappho's mantra is, more or less, Popper reissued for people who have to decide something by Thursday. So the idea is sound, it is old, and it is well argued, and people are still terrible at it. The usual explanation for that is also wrong, and it is worth getting right. You've probably heard that when your beliefs are challenged, your amygdala lights up. The same alarm that fires when you are physically threatened, and so changing your mind is neurologically hard for everyone. The study people are reaching for is real. It is Kaplan, Gimbel and Harris, published in Scientific Reports in 2016. But look at what it found. It was 40 people, all self-described liberals, being argued out of political positions. And the finding was a difference between individuals. The participants who resisted changing their minds showed more activity in the amygdala and the insula. The ones who did update showed less. So the brain signature is not the signature of being challenged. It is the signature of digging in. That is a much less comfortable result because the popular version hands you an excuse written in neuroscience, and the actual finding takes it away. And whatever the scanner says, the room supplies plenty of reason on its own. The two halves of this practice have wildly different payoffs, and they arrive on different schedules. Stating a strong opinion pays instantly. You look decisive. You look like you have a grip on it. People write it down. Abandoning that opinion also pays instantly, except the payment goes the other way, in front of the same people, having taken up their time. Nobody sits down and decides to stop holding their opinions weekly. It just quietly erodes, one meeting at a time, toward the half with the better incentives, which is why the fix cannot be a resolution to be more humble. It has to be structural. Rule 1. Predefine your exit data. Before you start advocating, write down what specific observation would change your mind and say it in the room. This is the Popper question turned into an obligation, and the writing it down is the whole trick. Because after the argument gets heated, your memory of what would have convinced you becomes remarkably flexible. Rule 2. Lower the volume. Strength of evidence and volume of delivery are not the same variable, and confusing them is what produced the corporate version of this phrase in the first place. State it as a thesis with its conditions attached, not as a fact that only an idiot would question. Rule 3, and this is the one that actually determines whether the other two survive. Reward the pivot. If you run a team and you only ever celebrate the people who turned out to be right, you have built a machine that punishes updating, and everyone will learn to defend their first guess to the end. Celebrate the person who says, out loud, new evidence just changed my mind. That sentence is expensive to say. Make it worth saying. So, weakly held, not loosely held. The strong opinion is not the achievement. It is the down payment, and it buys you one thing, which is motion in a direction specific enough to be checked. Everything that counts as knowing happens in the second half. Have the nerve to commit while the picture is still a mess. Then have the much rarer nerve to give it up the moment something better shows up in front of people while it still costs you something. That is the brief. If this was useful, the checklist in the description is the version you can actually run on a Monday morning. Thanks for watching.